Hello, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live broadcast on the release of the ISM Services PMI Report. I'm Dan Zeiger, a senior writer and editor for Inside Supply Management, which is Institute for Supply Management's member publication. And welcome to our discussion as we break down the Services PMI data for January. While the ISM Manufacturing Composite Index kind of hit the gas pedal to start 2026, the Services PMI kind of stayed in cruise control, which is a good thing. Because the reading of 53.8% in January matched the previous month, and all four sub-indexes that go into the Services PMI expanded for a second straight month. Business activity remained robust, but so did prices growth, which we'll discuss. Is this an indication of extended expansion for the sector, or could trade turbulence and geopolitical disruptions spoil the momentum? To discuss those dynamics and more, let's bring in Steve Miller. He's the chair of the ISM Services Business Survey Committee. Hey, Steve, how you doing?
Hey, Dan. Doing great.
Hey, there. At this time last month, we talked about the post-holiday lull that always seems to be a factor in the services sector, but didn't seem to be at least as for the composite index is concerned, a big factor in January. Just what stood out to you among the data?
Well, I'm constantly looking for trends, and it looks like we've got a positive trend going in the overall PMI. This is the first time in about a year that we've ticked up month to month in the 12-month average. We saw 3 months at 51.7, and then this month the 12-month average is 51.8. So not only are we the highest we've been since October of 24, but we're also finally seeing a trend that's been existent over the last 8 months. We're seeing that shift the average, and maybe, hopefully, not a dead cat bounce, but it looks positive. And having all of the numbers, above 50, as you said, for the sub indexes. It was the same last year, by the way. December and January both had all sub indexes above 50. So a good sign that maybe we're out of the doldrums that we had in the summer.
Yeah. A couple of the two headline sub-indexes that I think a lot of people look at first. Business activity index was 57.4%. So that was obviously very robust. Utilities, healthcare, social assistance, construction were the industries that had the best month. But also I was kind of surprised. A lot of people pointed out the new orders number as well. I mean, it was still good, 53.1%, but a lot of people pointed out that was down 3.4 percentage points month over month. Just talk about, those two dynamics, those two indexes. A lot of people look at those first, and just what stood out to you there?
Yeah, so on the new orders, it's funny seeing new orders go up and backlog go down, and then the next month see backlog go up and new orders go down. And so we saw that again this month. We saw a 1.4 percentage point increase in the backlog of orders, and we saw the new orders drop down. Difference being backlog of orders has been in contraction for a while, and new orders have been in expansion for a while. So we're still above the 12-month average at 53.1. 12-month average is 52.4 for new orders. I think that's a positive sign. Business activity, we're kind of out of the park at the moment at 57.4 relative to recent memory.
And then, as we're sticking to the indexes that feed directly into the PMI, we're going to get a delay in the federal jobs report on Friday due to the partial government shutdown. So we do have ADP, which came out today, revealed 22,000 jobs added in January, a disappointment considered, but almost all of those jobs, 21,000 of them, were in services. So that's something that should be noted. The ISM employment index for services, it stayed in expansion at 50.3%. Among companies surveys, 16.2% revealed indicated staff reductions. That's up a little bit from December, 12.5%. And just on a personal note, there's some services jobs in Washington, D.C. that are going vacant today. That's kind of near and dear to me, unfortunately. But just to give us the lay of the land there on the employment picture for January and what the data showed.
So it probably not a surprise, but certainly interesting that every number, every data point is a somewhat skewed data set So you have to work to try and do comparisons. ADP trending is consistent with what we're seeing in our employment numbers. ADP is, private sector, so it doesn't have the public administration or even public education in those numbers, where ours do. But it has manufacturing in it, which of course ours don't. Overall, when you look at the percentage of GDP that are impacted by those differences, not looking at employment, but looking at GDP, it's kind of a wash, unless you have the Doge type activities going on, around employment and labor and funding and things like that, which can have a significant impact. Numbers are positive. Seeing growth 2 months in a row, very positive, and the trend, although a bit anemic, is I wouldn't say it's no employment growth, but it's slow employment growth. And I think from a spending perspective, and which hits services industries pretty heavily, we're seeing some positive things in the economy overall that'll impact spending power from a tax return standpoint. Hopefully that flows through into the services sector. One other thing, Dan, that's interesting. It seems like there's no bad news that goes unsold. So I think I've seen 3 days of talk around the Amazon layoffs and how big they are, and they were announced in October. So I mean, some of it is you gotta focus on where we are. The commentary is we are seeing still some ongoing reluctance to backfill roles until business demand is viewed as strong. But other areas, utilities and information, are seeing continued hiring. Healthcare seeing continued hiring. A little bit of an impact in seasonality, where you see accommodation and food services. And arts, entertainment, and recreation. We might be seeing some pullback there just out of the holiday season.
Yeah. The prices index, that does not directly factor into the PMI, but it is an index, obviously, that people pay close attention to. It stayed high at 66.6%. That was a 1.5 point increase in January. And among companies surveyed there, 33.4% indicated paying more for materials and services. That was up from 27.5 in December. And as you noted in the report, the index itself reading at 66.6 was above the 12-month average. So just discuss what's going on there.
So there's two stories there. If you look at long term, I mean, this kind of extended above 60 hasn't happened since we saw pretty significant inflation numbers. Mm-hmm. Now, that was when we were pumping a whole lot more money into the economy as well from the government side. So how that manifests itself in inflation, TBD. But it is concerning to see that ongoing above 60 number. If you look at the last 12 months, the simple trend analysis is we're up about 2 percentage points in trend from the beginning of the year till now. But if you look at the time frame that I think most people have talked about most, is when tariff impacts started being announced, Liberation Day in April, we're down 0.2 percentage points in our trend for prices paid. So it looks like we've, so I'll say a caveat it from a new contracts for 2026 that may be incorporating tariff impacts. Our tariff impact seems to be not identifiable in the prices paid behavior. It seems like steady Eddie since April of last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you noted in one of the interviews you did earlier today that fuel and gasoline are among the commodities down in price. And I in my history of studying the PMI, it's really unusual to see those particular two commodities down in price, and yet the prices index, kind of being as naggingly high as it is. You also made a observation in the report that with business activities levels on the trend that they are and supplier delivery times on the trends that they are, that prices index is going to have to be closely watched in the coming months. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, the fourth piece of the puzzle that I would put in is backlog of
Mhm.
orders or order backlog. If we see the order backlog starting to creep up, slower supplier deliveries, and continued pricing pressure while business activity is high, only thing I've seen result from that type of behavior is inflation. You end up paying more because you're trying to get commodities that are or products that are in short supply. Inventory levels are low. We have a very low reading for this month. We're going to have to replenish inventories if suppliers aren't moving very fast and prices are high. Boy, look at that to see what the actual impact is on profitability. It may not come through for inflation, but it will certainly impact overall costs of operations.
Yeah. The supplier deliveries index. So we'll just get that on the record for this, our broadcast here. That was 54.2% in January, up 2.4 percentage points from December, and a higher supplier delivery index. For those of you who don't know, that indicates slower deliveries, which is typical as demand improves and the economy improves, or it could mean, disruptions or other mitigating activity. In the report, you noted, I'll read a quote that you had. You said that there was more respondent commentary in January on tariff impacts and uncertainty, potentially the result of annual contract renewals and geopolitical tensions, unquote. Those were kind of themes that were in the manufacturing report as well the other day, which we'll get to a little bit when we talk about new export orders. But yeah, just talk about, that level of concern in services about those dynamics. How high is it?
Yeah, so Dan, I saw a couple of comments around geopolitical impacts. Some of it was, or one of them was on exports, and the other one was on price or cost to bring product in. And so I was looking. So nothing. Also, a couple of additional tariff announcements, in the last month. I was trying to find, so why would we be seeing that bump up? And going back to my history, negotiating at the fiscal year end of suppliers was a fairly common activity, getting next year's contracts in place, taking it towards the end of fiscal year and seeing what kind of mutual agreement could be settled on in terms of ongoing pricing. I'm curious whether it was end of year negotiations or whether it was just new contract years starting January 1. I wonder how much impact that is having on the actual prices paid. We're seeing a blip. It's a high number historically speaking. It's not as big as what we saw in the July August timeframe, but still a pretty significant increase over the last couple of months. So I'm just digging for what in normal supply chain behavior may be driving that type of impact, and the best I could come up with at the time is looking at the new contract pricing, because over the last 3 months it's been in the commentary, pushing back on suppliers, negotiating with suppliers around tariffs, and so this may be the culmination of that impact.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of camp there for a little bit, and let's talk about the new export orders. I mean, it was brought up to you earlier today, and I have seen a couple of comments on it, in the various economic reports or journalism stories on our data today. They zeroed in on new export orders. That had a big change. 45.0% in January was that index reading. That was down from 54.2 in December. That's a 9.2% decrease. Now, it must be noted that a healthy share of services industries or companies don't export, or at least don't measure them. But yeah, there was some sentiment that you, in one of your responses, you compared it to what Susan Spence reported in the manufacturing data the other day. And there was a comment on that about some, anti-American buying sentiment, for a lack of a better term. Just talk about some of those dynamics and how it could have potentially impacted exports.
So that was also in the services commentary.
Yeah.
And, and we saw that kind of in retail, a lot of the stories in the October, November timeframe around alcohol sales in Canada, and anti-American sentiment there impacting the retail trade. And since retail trade is what is it, 6% of GDP, and you see a significant impact there. Also, is an area where we see export volume. Information management of companies and support services are also, it's more than 12%, 13% of GDP about. Those are two other areas where we see export sales. So establishing utility construction in other countries, IT services that are being sold from U.S. companies to other geographies. So they're fairly significant pieces of the U.S. economy, and if we're seeing negative sentiment in other countries, it could have a significant impact. The 45.1, looking historically, is the lowest number we've had in more than 2 years, at a 42.9 back in June of 24. So a year and a half ago. And other than that, looking back, there isn't another number like that until I think we hit July of 22. So it's an September 22. It's an unusually low number, one that we want to keep watching for. We saw a drop also in imports. And could it be the effect of the Buy American? And we'll see how that will settle out for the U.S. services industries. But with both of those down in January specifically, it was kind of curious for me.
Yeah, that's something we will definitely keep an eye on, especially with those last two indexes, exports and imports. This is one of the fun questions that I like, where not only we get to talk about current trends, but we get to do a little tutorial on how the PMI data works. And it's about the inventories index. And you kind of alluded to it earlier, but we'll expand on it a little bit. It was 45.1% in January, and that was down 9.1 percentage points compared to the previous month, which is certainly sizable. But it's not unusual for that index to decrease in January after the holidays, if you've looked at recent years' data. But also, interestingly, the inventory sentiment index, which measures obviously inventory sentiment and how much companies feel that they have compared to what they need, that interestingly went up a tad to 54.3%. So yeah, kind of discuss those dynamics in January. And I know we've talked in the past about how those indexes work in tandem, and you should keep an eye on both of them. Just discuss those dynamics.
So the inventory sentiment is, do I have too much? And seeing that creep up a little bit with such a significant drop in actual inventories, that's certainly a little yellow flag for us, I think, Dan. Is it we have the wrong inventories because there was a lot of guessing going on to try and avoid tariff impacts last year? Maybe that contributes to it. You certainly expect to see inventories come down at the end of the year as people are managing their books and trying to reduce the taxes that they're paying on their working capital at the end of the year. But watching the sentiment go up when that dropped, it wasn't a huge increase for the inventory sentiment. And when you look at it for the year, it's below the average. And it's the only number that's lower than it in the last, going back, other than the 0.2% lower last month. We've got one in, in 53.2 in July, and then it goes back to December, January timeframe in 53s. So not a big number. It's a bit of an increase, which was a surprise, but it's not a big number historically speaking. One other thing I was just looking at over in the data here, back to the exports question, going back 3 years, January was always a expansionary for exports. 52, 56 in January, 59. I'm back to 22 is the last time we had an export number in contraction. in January. So that's pretty significant, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always good to keep an eye on those trends. So yeah, we'll definitely watch that index in the coming months for sure. Hey, the respondent comments I thought were really interesting. This month from the standpoint is that, as you know, Steve, there is probably no hotter topic in the supply chain profession right now than AI. And there were, it's going to be a hot topic of discussion at ISM's annual conference in Denver, Colorado, at the end of April. I think by my count, we will have 11 sessions related in some way or another to AI. And Steve and Susan Spence will be there as well to talk about the PMI, and they'll have a little session. So it might be something you want to check out. But in regards to AI, there were multiple references to AI and data centers in the comments and the services comments in January. I'll read one in particular from a respondent in healthcare and social assistance. This person wrote, AI data center construction is expected to cause constraints in the IT market and availability. We haven't seen delays on IT equipment yet, but expect them in the coming months. And there were other comments on AI's impact on purchasing and compliance. Just discuss that. I mean, did that level surprise you? I mean, it did me. And yeah, just talk about, is this a trend that needs to be watched in the services sector?
Yeah, definitely. The old story around picks and shovels. That's what we're seeing in the commentary right now. Is we're seeing a lot of utility activity. We're seeing activity in information. We're not seeing commentary saying we're laying people off because of the impact of AI. We're not seeing we've impacted productivity significantly because of the rollout of AI. We're not getting those type of comments. We are though getting comments that it's driving business activity within the services sector. So with Bitcoin down in the low 70s today, I think, and some of the AI companies, I think NVIDIA again took another hit today. That's a pretty big risk, I think, in the services sector, Dan. Is that there is quite a bit of business activity being driven, no surprise probably to anybody on the call, in the AI space. But we're not seeing a lot of commentary around how it's driving business benefits in our comments that we're getting from the survey. That one that you mentioned around risk, I think there's tremendous opportunity in the risk space for using AI. Whether it's in AP or whether it's looking at supplier health or that type of thing. One specifically, I'm looking at seeing how we can use AI to help us comb through, terabytes of data to get good insights into where risks might be. But we're not seeing a lot in the commentary. I expect to see more this year based on the amount of emphasis that's being placed in many services companies about not only piloting, but embedding those activities, specifically at our company, embedding those activities into the day-to-day to see where we can derive benefits.
Yeah. Lastly, before I ask you if there's anything we haven't covered or to wrap it up, there was nothing in the comments, the published comments. Maybe there may have been some that you saw. I know it was, it's been the last couple of weeks, late in the month. It may be more of a factor next month and next month's data, but I just wanted to ask, the winter weather across the country has, obviously made headlines, and some of the transportation snarls that have resulted. Any impact in the January data, or do you think it could have an impact in the February data?
Yeah, I'd be looking for it in the February data, Dan. I think last February we had some similar activities, at least in the Dallas area. So the level of airline impact, I saw one note from not this past weekend, but the weekend before. There were approximately 4 times as many flights canceled during that weekend than during the government shutdown for a month. So fairly on the transportation industry or accommodation, where I actually don't know where flights for a Delta and American Airlines fits. Do you know which one of our industries the companies like that would be?
No,
Okay.
Not for services. Yeah.
So I'll be checking. I'll make sure I have that at hand for next month to see if we're seeing any shift from from expansion to contraction for
Mhm.
for those sectors that could be impacted there. That's a good question, Dan.
Yeah. Well, I know. Yeah, I know. You mentioned Dallas, and it's hard to believe that that a place like that could be impacted by winter weather as much as much as it is. I mean, it way better than me. But yeah, I remember that year the Super Bowl was there, and
Exactly.
it was like being in the Arctic. There were the headlines about that. But yeah, recent winter weather covered most of the country. I think those of us here in Arizona were about the only people that weren't significantly impacted by that. So yeah, that will be something to watch in the February data. Hey, we're coming up on time here to the bottom of the hour. Yeah, Steve, is there anything that we haven't talked about, or anything that I haven't asked that you think might be important to include before we wrap up, or what CEOs or executives should take away from the data? Anything you want to add?
The one, and I think I've mentioned this a couple of times over prior calls. We're seeing behavior in the indexes that show we've got an elevated level of activity, and it's starting to drive metrics, slower supplier deliveries, an uptick in prices paid. That keep a close watch on that backlog of orders and see if all of these stars align. It's going to be a fight to be able to get things that we need in order to keep our businesses going without paying more. So maybe a good time to take a look at those contracts where both tariff impacts as well as availability. You think about memory components going on prices up for the first time that I've seen it in our survey this month. Those start making sure you're aware of where those shortages could occur, because it's not the shortage that hurts, it's being back in the line for people trying to get that product that's on short supply that really get hurt. And I think that watch out from the healthcare sector, where who would think that healthcare is going to be impacted? Well, they are, because utilities is sucking it up. So they're going to be impacted from an availability standpoint. So don't just look at products that are important or specific to your industry, but looking at those that are going to be in high demand in other industries and how that might impact you.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks a lot, Steve. A great conversation on the data as always. And yeah, looking forward to diving into what the February data will say. And, hopefully for our business people that, rely on that data, hopefully the impacts and the dynamics that we've talked about won't be that great, but I know it'll be interesting. So looking forward to discussing it with you next month. Hey, thanks for joining us today. And you can go to ISM's website to read the roundup article that discusses a lot of what Steve and I have talked about here. And if you want to be a part of the ISM Manufacturing or Services Business Survey panels that help compile data for the ISM PMI reports, you can go to ismworld.org/join the panel for more information. We'll see you back here next month when we break down the ISM PMI reports data for February, manufacturing and services. So for Steve Miller and for some good people who helped us behind the scanes today, Christina Cahill and Jennifer Stevens, I'm Dan Zeiger. We'll see you next time.